Do you want to say that again?
Yeah,
I didn't understand.
Hi guys, I'm Emily, the director of IQ, and today we're going to be interviewing Sean Go. Can you please introduce yourself and give a little background into what you're doing right now?
Yeah, thanks Emily. So I was born and raised in Manila, Philippines, and for college I went to UC Berkeley where I graduated with 3 degrees in 4 years. So I did business school like you guys, but I also added an additional degree in economics and one more in geography. At Emory, I recently graduated from the MBA and the Master's in Law program.
So what was your reason in taking economics and geography along with business? What drove you to do that? Especially at UC Berkeley, because I know it's really hard to get enough credits to major in 3 different areas.
So in terms of why economics, UC Berkeley is an economics school. If you look at some of the professors that we have Laura Tyson, Christina Romer. Both of them served in some capacity with US presidents. So Christina Romer, I think, was the head of the economic advisors for Obama, and then Laura Tyson was the head of the economic advisors for Clinton. So for me, going to Berkeley, I knew I had to study economics just because that's what it's known for. One main reason why I studied geography is it's a good counterbalance to studying business. And the reason that I say that is business is mostly about maximizing profits and getting the most out of your business, sometimes regardless of other social factors and environmental considerations. Whereas in geography, you're taught the other side of the spectrum. How do you run businesses that are sustainable? How do you ensure that businesses can operate indefinitely for hundreds of years without exploiting or overusing a resource?
So I know that you're involved in a lot of different fields for entrepreneurship. Can you give a little bit of background into what ventures you're currently involved in?
Yeah, so after working at Ernst & Young for roughly 1 year, I decided that entrepreneurship was a better fit for me. I did have a fantastic experience at Ernst & Young in San Francisco, but I prefer compensation structures where your base pay is 0 or close to 0, and your variable pay can be infinite. That way you put your money where your mouth is, right? If you're good, then you'll be heavily rewarded, but if you suck, then you earn almost nothing.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, the first ventures that I started were related to the educational space. So I have 2 companies in the education space, and we have 3 main lines of revenue. The first one is essay editing for master's students. However, in order to really establish ourselves, we only started with a specific niche, which was your master's in finance, your master's in financial engineering, your master's in data analytics. The second line of revenue that we have is job placements. So you can think of this sort of as a recruiting agency for international students who want to intern in different countries. So if you wanted to, let's say if you're a student from Beijing and you wanted to intern in London, or if you wanted to intern in Philadelphia or Chicago or LA or New York, those are some cities that we could place you in. The final revenue stream is job coaching, and I think that naturally fits in with the first 2, because once you get into a good school, once you get your good internship experiences, then you need to learn how to interview, and that's another service we offer. So in terms of education, I like to say that we want to be the sort of the Amazon of education, where we can squeeze customer lifetime value from the start of your academic journey to your professional journey, or even if you get a PhD or pursue different careers afterwards.
Wait, so these 3 streams of revenue are all part of one startup that you started?
The 3 streams of revenue are part of 2 different companies. One of them is called Go Further Careers, and the other one is called ProRight. And in terms of some of the press that we've gotten for Go Further Careers, which is primarily a B2B platform, is we won the Pitch to Professors here at Emory, which is our local equivalent of the Shark Tank. And then we also won the Pitch to Professors equivalent at Wharton because my co-founder is an MBA at UPenn. And we've also gotten some exposure in articles like Entrepreneurial Inc. magazine, the Next Web, and the Huffington Post. So that one is a bit more established. In total, I'd say if we combine these two companies, over the 4 years of our operations, we've secured roughly 4,000 clients, which to me is a really nice milestone because as an international student, I thought it was really hard to get a job, and I thought it was also really hard to get into a good school. So being able to pay it forward in some way really struck a chord with me.
Is there a reason why you have two separate companies rather than joining them together?
In terms of brand differentiations, I think it's a helpful strategy in general. I mean, if you look at different companies out there, like from, let's say schools, for example, like you'll have an engineering school, you'll have a business school, and you'll have, let's say, an art school because you want some element of differentiation. And I think the same goes for business, and you see that across a lot of industries, including like fashion, for example, where you'll see like Armani having Giorgio Armani, Armani Exchange, Emporio Armani, and Armani Collection.
At what point, like, how did you get involved in your startups? Like, did you get involved when you're studying for your MBA or when you were an undergraduate? Like, what was your pathway?
I got involved in starting the first company after I left EY. Applying to the MBA was a hedge. There's a high chance that startups will fail or that startups won't reach a level of revenue that is comparable to the pay that you would get off an MBA program. So for me, I knew that I wanted to try starting my own company, but if all else fails, then I could still recruit as an MBA student for jobs that pay, $150,000 to $200,000 and secure it, right?
Smart move. Going off your experience from when you worked in EY, and I know that you also worked at HSBC, from what I've seen on your LinkedIn profile, how has working in these big corporations influenced your management style in your current startups?
I think the main benefit of working for a large company is you would see how you could standardize certain processes so that each incremental editor or each incremental coach that we add, there's not that much extra work in terms of paperwork and in terms of recruiting. One thing that I would say big companies need improvement on is their speed, and that's just pretty natural, right?
Yeah.
Because as you become bigger, you become clunkier and you also become slower. I think the advantage of having a startup is the degree of flexibility you have in implementing programs requires less approvals, it requires less sign-offs from different departments and different individuals. So as a startup, you can operate a lot faster without as much traditional controls.
How many employees do you have currently in your startups?
So these businesses are cyclical, and you could see why, right?
Yeah.
Because application seasons are hot from August usually to Feb, but during the peak seasons, we would have maybe like 40 contractors. So that includes people who will give interviews and people who will help edit or write essays. And then during the off season, it really depends on how the demand flows, but typically I'd say there's at least 10 people who work in some capacity, either part-time or full-time.
What do you guys do during the off season?
The off seasons are not complete off season, so the way you can think about it is like if we're plotting like a chart, like you have your internship sales, a bit like a sine function, where the lows and the highs typically vary only on like every 2 months. So and that's a function of how we place interns. We place them for 6-week periods. So every 6 weeks, there's going to be a bump in sales, and then there's going to be 6 weeks where it cools down. So internship placements are pretty steady, but application seasons, you see like a giant spike, and then it sort of plateaus, and then it goes down when all the applications end. So during off-peak seasons, what we mostly do is we try to secure new accounts or we try to secure new businesses. My area of expertise is mostly business-to-business sales. So I'd rather lock in one large client and get 100 clients from one funnel than to manually try to pick a consumer out of like a target group. And the companies that we work with, a lot of them are venture funded companies that are backed by corporate venture capital. These companies are essentially venture capital branches of large Fortune 500 companies. The suppliers that we work with, for example, a lot of them are funded by publicly listed companies in the New York Stock Exchange.
How do you generate demand for your company? Like, how do you get the word out there to like create awareness for your startup? Because I know that's something that a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with.
Yeah, so in terms of sales, there's always a lot of different avenues that you can decide to enter. In my case, again, like my specialty is B2B sales, so I don't actually need to raise that much awareness. What typically happens is I do cold calling, or maybe I'll get a referral, and I work with an established vendor, and they just tell me the types of services that they want. So they'll say, okay, every month we're probably going to have 50 kids who are interested in accounting jobs. We have another 50 kids who are interested in applying to investment banking. Can you source the editors, or can you source the job coaches for these functions? And my role would be to find them, right? So business to business, I think, is a lot easier for me, but we also have certain consumer retail acquisition strategies where our goal is to really lock an individual on a personal level. And again, there's a lot of different strategies to execute. One of the strategies that we did was I went to China and I toured a lot of schools. So I went to Peking University, I went to Dalian University, also went to Renmin University, and I would give presentations with clubs in those schools so that they would get awareness of what our company does. That strategy I don't think is that scalable, but it looks optically good on social media if you see like a company is actually producing presentations in reputable universities. Another strategy is pretty simple, but it's if you want your company to gain credibility, then you'd want to get as much good exposure in the media as I was saying a while ago. So like when people, especially when you're buying a service from us, these are high touch packages, right? Like we're not selling a shirt, we're not selling a coffee mug, we're selling
Like
service
intangible
packages that
yeah.
that usually cost over $1,000, right?
Yeah.
So the credibility that you can find online is very important, but we also have sort of guerrilla strategies that we use. Some of them would be to set up tents in universities in China, and then we would give out like free bags, we would give out free shirts and other merchandise.
Okay.
If you look at our website, you'll see we have bags, we even make iPhone cases for our clients.
Okay.
And we also have like a magazine called The Pro Right Times. So a lot of different initiatives, just all with the goal of reinforcing each other. Like you have to understand which social media platform your clients typically use. In our case, for a retail acquisition strategy, the most successful platform is WeChat because that's where all the Chinese people hang out.
Yeah. So going off of your digital marketing strategies, can you go off more of like how you use WeChat to reach your target audience?
Yeah, so a metaphor that I would use for our client acquisition strategy is we're like farmers, right? Because a lot of our products are high touch products and you can't expect to convert a user within a day. So with our digital marketing strategies, we would collect groups of, let's say, 500 people, each broadly grouped into certain themes. So 500 potential accounting students, 500 potential finance students, 500 potential marketing students. And then we would also have other filters like let's say some people would want to apply to Canada, some would apply to the UK, and some would apply to the US. So we would collect a lot of these groups, and we would try to get as much goodwill as we can in these groups. Some of the ways that we do this is we'll host free webinars or free seminars for them to ask questions to our editors and essentially get free advice. And you'll have students ask questions like, if I'm an art major with a low GMAT, then what is your best strategy for, like how do I get over these challenges and get into, let's say, an accounting program, right? In some career groups, we would post a certain job opening so that the group members would be able to access these opportunities more quickly. But overall, for these types of products, it takes a while to build your trust. And once you build the trust and once you lock in a client, then the way these clients grow, it's sort of like a binomial or a trinomial tree where you see one branch into two, and then the two branches into three, and then each of those specific branches branch out into even more. I guess that's our way of ensuring that we can get the trust of the customers and obviously do a good job to get those referrals down the line.
Have you thought about promoting at Emory University? I know there's a lot of students that might be interested.
We actually do have a lot of clients from
really?
Emory.
Okay.
Mostly we have some undergraduate clients and we have some MSBA clients. So we promote at Emory, but I think the most effective channel is really the digital ones because our service is primarily catered towards international Chinese students, and it's easier. I feel like it's easier to find them in social media platforms than it is finding them hanging out at the business school.
Yeah.
Our primary channel is actually WeChat.
Like taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture of entrepreneurship, what are your biggest failures and successes that you have experienced as an entrepreneur?
I think with biggest achievements, it's more about consistency than a one-time thing. Like anyone can do, if you've tried cooking, anyone can cook a meal very well once, but it's about the consistency.
Yeah.
So for me, I try to not think about a biggest achievement, but I try to think about whether it'll lead to recurring revenues.
Other than your education startups, what else are you involved in?
My brother George, he's an MBA at Stanford, and my friend Tao Tao, he used to be a trader for Goldman Sachs and Bridgewater Associates, the largest hedge fund in the world. And we started a fund called HGR Digital Asset Group, where we invest primarily in early stage venture and digital protocols as cryptocurrencies. But because we're a small fund, our check sizes are typically around 50,000 to 200,000 per investment.
Being involved in a lot of different ventures in different industries, how do you balance that? Because I know a fund is really different from your education startup.
Yeah, so I think in terms of my mindset is, I just like farming examples. I think of myself as a farmer. So each business is like a new seed that you plant. And different plants require different nutrients. They grow well in different types of soils, and the pace of their growth varies, right? So if I acquire the skills to grow an orange tree, then a lot of those skills that I've learned will be applicable to growing a grapevine or an apple tree. And the goal is really to create sustainable sources of revenue, or to always be able to harvest fruits in the long term, right? So I never want to sell any of the trees, or I just want to keep harvesting fruit forever.
Okay.
But once one tree is healthy and good, then I hire people to take care of that, and then I can move on to the next to the next plant.
Is there any other industries that you're interested in getting involved in?
Well, I have a list of maybe 200, but I always, at the end of the day, I ask myself, am I uniquely qualified to win in this space? And in terms of education, I think I mean, I don't see a lot of people with 5 degrees, and
Yeah.
I think that's an area that I could win in.
Okay.
And in terms of asset management, I think my connections are pretty strong, and in terms of managing money, the backgrounds of our founders are in really good Wall Street companies. We're also in a unique position to generate alpha.
Taking a step back from your startups and looking at you yourself as an entrepreneur, what are some habits that you found critical to your success?
And the first habit, I think, is to find aspirational comps. This works individually and also for companies. So for, let's say, our educational companies, a lot of people might discount education as a small industry, but our aspirational comps would be New Oriental, which is a company listed in the New York Stock Exchange with a $13 billion market cap, right? So, and they only offer like testing services, but 13 billion is pretty substantial. I guess in terms of aspirational comps on a personal level, like if, let's say you mentioned you like kickboxing. So if you like kickboxing, then I'd probably follow, a good kickboxer or like a champion and watch their videos, see how they move, and try to replicate what they do in your routine. Another strategy, more geared towards your companies as well, is you should focus on revenues, not costs, because you can only reduce costs by, let's say, a finite amount, right? But your revenue, you can increase it to here, or you can theoretically increase it by infinite amount. So, would you rather increase your revenues by 10,000 and increase your cost by 2,000? Or would you rather just decrease your cost by 500, right? Like the first one to me makes the most sense. The last habit that I think that is also geared towards managing a company or dealing with clients is, it's super cliche, but it's put yourself in the shoes of the customer. So in general, we please our customers, but typically we have maybe 1 or 2% of customers who may complain. And in that case, it's easy to be annoyed at the customer because you feel like you did a good job and maybe they're asking for something that's unreasonable. But putting yourself in the shoes of the customers really is helpful, because most people are not bad people. They just really want to get into the school, or they just really want to get into the job, so they're extra nitpicky, right? So understanding where the clients are coming from.
What have you found to be really helpful when on the path of starting a business?
The first thing that I believe as an entrepreneur is you need to sell your product immediately, because you can do 100, you can do 1,000 surveys, but a lot of surveys, in my experience, are pretty inaccurate, because what people say they're going to do may not be the same as what they're going to do. So what better way to test whether or not someone will buy a product than actually selling a product, right? So I think one of the downfalls is for a lot of people who, let's say, go to Ivy League schools or schools that are pretty good, is analysis paralysis. They'll always think of all the things that can go wrong, or they'll rely too much on survey data without actually selling and receiving cash in, right? So for me, I always want to sell as fast as possible, because then I get the ultimate form of validation, which is people transfer money to your bank account, right?
Yeah.
And then the second thing is with aspirational comps. When you're looking at starting a company, you can look at other companies for inspiration. And recently, for me, I've been looking at Disney as an inspiration and to Starbucks as an example. And the reason why I think Disney is a great company to look at is because they have a culture of empowerment. They're pretty progressive, and they tell inspirational stories about different themes, like the benefits of taking risk, that doing good will probably yield the most fruit in the future. And with Starbucks was very innovative when it came to their strategies to make their employees happy. The first thing they did was they gave all the baristas or the partners options to get shares in the company. So each barista owns Starbucks equity, right?
Oh, I did not know that.
And then Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, well, he stepped down, but he grew Starbucks from 8 stores to however many stores we have today. And he also provided his baristas with free college level education. When you look at aspirational comps, you can also look at aspirational leaders. And yeah, Howard Schultz of Starbucks and Bob Iger of Disney are 2 CEOs that I think really know how to manage companies, at least today.
Oh. Are there any like startups on your radar that like have impressed you? Like, you've seen them and you're like, wow, that's a great startup.
Yeah, obviously WeWork is a great startup.
Alright.
But I guess in terms of my radar, one interesting company that I've looked at, Luckin Coffee, and they're a Chinese coffee company, and a lot of analysts are thinking that it'll surpass Starbucks in terms of their market cap eventually, just because of the way they integrate mobile payments more effectively and how they can cater to Chinese tastes. And again, if you look at investments in China, a lot of companies in China do have significant market cap. So obviously you've heard of like Alibaba and Tencent, which owns WeChat. I think Chinese startups are pretty interesting because in the Bay Area, you see a lot of fallen angels, right? So fallen angels just refers to startups that list at let's say they IPO at $26 a share, and they always fall. That's what they call it, the fallen angels, right? But with Chinese startups, a lot of them are not fallen angels, but they'll steadily increase over time.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. That was our podcast with Sean Go. His social media links are down in the description box, so make sure to check them out if you want to learn more about him and his company. And stay tuned for our next podcast.